My name is Lena Barrett. I'm 38 years old, and I've climbed into wrecked cars on rain-slick highways without letting my hands shake. For 12 years, I worked as a flight nurse in eastern Kentucky. I've started IV lines inside helicopters, bucking through thunderstorms. I've held pressure on wounds while pilots searched for somewhere safe to land. I've looked frightened families in the eye and told them the truth without making it cruel. But one Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after my ex-husband's new baby was born, I was standing outside the maternity wing when my former mother-in-law walked toward me wearing the smile she always saved for moments when she believed God had personally proven her right. Vivian Hale stopped close enough for me to smell her rose perfume. 2 nurses were standing at the medication station behind me. A respiratory therapist was pushing an empty bassinet down the hall. Vivian looked at my navy scrubs, the flight badge clipped to my chest, and the thin silver locket resting against my throat. Then she said it loudly. "Leaving you was the wisest thing Grant ever did. Now he finally has a son with a woman who knows how to make a family." 7 years of pity, gossip, and quiet humiliation were packed into that one sentence. I didn't blink. I touched the silver locket my grandmother had given me when I graduated from nursing school and asked Vivian one question. "Is that the story you're still telling?" Her smile hesitated. She had expected tears. Maybe anger. Maybe a scene large enough to confirm everything she had spent years saying about me. Instead, I stood there as calm as I had been the night I landed beside a burning truck and carried a stranger through broken glass. 6 minutes later, the automatic doors at the end of the hall opened. A man named Caleb Trent stepped through them. Vivian didn't know him. Grant wasn't expecting him. And my former best friend Marissa, lying inside a private maternity room with Grant's supposed son in her arms, went so pale that a nurse asked whether she was about to faint. At the time, I didn't understand why. I only knew something had shifted. 3 months later, a sealed medical record would be opened under a judge's order, and the name inside it would change everything the Hale family had told the town about me. Welcome to Calm Deception Stories, where quiet women stop carrying other people's shame. Like this video, subscribe, and stay with me, because Caleb's arrival was only the first crack in their perfect lie. To understand why I did not answer Vivian with anger, I have to take you back to the beginning. I grew up outside a small town called Ashford, the kind of place where church bells carried farther than secrets but somehow arrived later. My mother altered wedding dresses in the front room of our house. My father repaired farm equipment until arthritis bent 2 of his fingers sideways. We did not have much money, but we had rules. Finish what you start. Tell the truth even when it costs you. And never confuse being loud with being strong. The last rule came from my grandmother, June. She had been widowed at 41 and raised 3 daughters while running a roadside diner 6 days a week. She wore a small silver locket every day. Inside, it was a photograph of herself at 18, standing beside a river with her hair blowing across her face. When she gave it to me, she said, "People will try to tell you who you are. Don't answer too fast. Make sure they deserve an answer." I wore that locket through nursing school, through my first night shift, through every helicopter landing, every death notification, and every moment when calm mattered more than comfort. That steadiness made me good at my job. It also made me dangerously good at enduring things I should have confronted. I met Grant Hale when I was 27. He worked in commercial insurance and had the kind of charm that made people lean closer when he spoke. Grant was handsome, but that was not what drew me in. What drew me in was the attention. He listened as if every sentence I spoke mattered. When I told him about landing beside a flooded highway during my first year as a flight nurse, he did not interrupt with a story of his own. He asked what I had been afraid of. I thought that meant he understood me. Later, I learned that some people listen because they care, and some people listen because knowing where you are tender makes it easier to shape you. Grant's mother, Vivian, loved me in the beginning. At least, she loved what I represented. I was educated, respected, and useful in emergencies. I came from a decent family. I attended church often enough to satisfy her and worked enough hours to impress her. At our wedding, she introduced me to distant relatives as our little lifesaver. For the first year, I believed I had married into warmth. But strength, I would discover, was welcome in the Hale family only when it served them. Grant and I talked about children before we married. He wanted 2. I wanted 1, maybe 2 if life allowed it. We imagined a house with a porch and a yard large enough for a swing set. Grant kept a list of names in the Notes app on his phone. If we had a girl, he liked Clara. If we had a boy, He wanted to use his father's name, Thomas. During the first year, we were not worried. During the second, we became careful with calendars. By the third, every month had a beginning filled with hope, and an ending neither of us knew how to discuss. The absence of a child became a quiet object in our marriage. We moved around it at breakfast. We carried it into holidays. We felt it sitting between us when friends announced pregnancies. Because I worked in medicine, I knew infertility was not a moral judgment and not automatically a woman's problem. I also knew guessing was useless. One evening, I set 2 mugs of coffee on our kitchen table and told Grant we should both be tested. Nothing dramatic, I said. Basic blood work. A standard evaluation. We get facts, then we decide what comes next. He smiled at first. Not a warm smile. A dismissive one. You spend too much time around doctors. I am a nurse. You know what I mean. I asked again a week later. That time, he became irritated. There has never been anything wrong with the men in my family. I stared at him because the sentence sounded so absurdly old-fashioned that I thought he might be joking. He was not. He said the Hale men were healthy. His father had fathered 3 children. His grandfather had fathered 5. The issue was probably stress, my night shifts, the chemicals at the hospital, or the years I had spent prioritizing my career. I asked whether he had decided the problem was mine without being tested. He walked out of the room. That should have been a warning. Instead, I told myself he was frightened. I told myself men were sometimes defensive about fertility because the world had taught them to confuse biology with worth. I told myself compassion was more useful than confrontation. That was the first story I invented to protect him. I went through the testing alone. The clinic was in Lexington, 70 miles away. I chose it because I did not want my medical information moving through Ashford before I did. In small towns, privacy is less a right than a temporary condition. My results were normal. Not probably normal. Not nothing obvious. Normal. The specialist told me there was no medical reason I could not become pregnant. She recommended that Grant complete a basic evaluation before we discussed further options. I sat in my car afterward with the report in my lap, feeling relief and confusion at the same time. When I brought the report home, Grant barely looked at it. Doctors miss things, he said. The clinic wants to evaluate both of us. I'm not doing that. Why? Because I don't need strangers measuring whether I'm a man. That is not what the test measures. It is to me. He folded my report, returned it to the envelope, and pushed it across the table as though it were an accusation I had made against him. We did not speak about testing again for almost 2 months. Then Grant told me he had a business meeting in Lexington. He left before breakfast on a Thursday and returned after dark. That was unusual. Most of his clients were within 40 miles. When I asked how the meeting went, he poured bourbon into a water glass, though he almost never drank on weeknights. Waste of time, he said. What company was it? He looked at me too quickly. Why? I'm making conversation. It was just a meeting, Lena. He carried the bourbon into the den and closed the door. The next morning, he was pleasant again. Too pleasant. He brought coffee to me in bed. He asked about my flight schedule. He suggested we take a weekend trip to Nashville. Before Lexington, he had argued about testing. After Lexington, he behaved as though the subject itself had become forbidden. I noticed the change. I did not investigate it. You do not audit the people you love. At least, that was what I believed then. A few weeks later, Vivian began telling people I had health complications. She started carefully. At a church dinner, a woman from the choir touched my arm and said she was praying for me. I asked why. Her expression changed. Oh, she said. I thought you knew. Knew what? She glanced across the fellowship hall toward Vivian. Nothing. I must have misunderstood. Vivian stood beside the dessert table, cutting pecan pie with the serene concentration of someone who had already decided how the story would be remembered. I confronted Grant that night. Your mother is telling people I have fertility problems. He loosened his tie and avoided my eyes. She's worried. She's discussing my medical information. She doesn't know anything specific. She knows enough to tell the choir. Grant sighed as if I were exhausting him. People notice we don't have children, Lena. What do you expect her to say? The truth. And what truth is that? That my tests were normal, and you refused to be evaluated. The room went still. Grant looked at me in a way I had never seen before. Not angry, cornered. You would humiliate me like that? I am asking you to correct a lie about me. My mother is trying to protect us. She is protecting you. He picked up his keys and left. The next morning, he said he had slept at his office. Years later, I learned he had spent that night at Marissa's apartment. Vivian's sympathy became public after that. She would place a hand over mine at family gatherings and talk about God having different plans for different women. She told people I had chosen a demanding career because perhaps motherhood had never been intended for me. She said Grant loved children and deserved a home filled with them. Then, one Sunday after church, she introduced me to a visiting minister's wife. "This is Lena," she said. "Grant's wife. She saves lives for a living." The woman smiled. Vivian continued, "Some women are given gifts in one place because they aren't built for another." The visiting woman gave me the tender, embarrassed look people reserve for grief they have been told about before meeting you. Vivian squeezed my hand. "Some women know how to save a life," she said, "but not how to make one." She said it softly, almost lovingly. That made it worse. Cruelty delivered with a smile is difficult to fight because everyone expects you to thank the person holding the knife. I drove home beside Grant in silence. He turned on the radio. I switched it off. "Did you hear what your mother said? She didn't mean it the way you took it." "How else could I take it?" "She's grieving." "For what?" He tightened both hands around the steering wheel. "For the family we thought we'd have." "What about what I'm grieving?" He did not answer. That night, I slept in the guest room. By morning, I had convinced myself that arguing would only deepen the damage. I decided to let my work, my character, and the truth speak for me. That was my second mistake. My best friend Marissa Cole had known me since nursing school. We met during an anatomy lab when she dropped a tray of instruments, swore loudly enough to stop the room, and then laughed until I did too. Marissa was everything I was not. Spontaneous, emotional, restless. She changed jobs often and relationships faster. She could turn a grocery run into an adventure, and a terrible decision into a story everyone wanted to hear. She stood beside me at my wedding in a pale blue dress. She held my father's hand at my grandmother's funeral. When the fertility rumors began, she was the first person I called. I trusted her enough to show her my clinic report. We were sitting at my kitchen counter when I slid the envelope toward her. "My tests were normal," I said. "Grant still won't go." Marissa read the first page. Her eyes moved over the conclusion, then returned to me. "Does he know you have this?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "That doctors miss things." She folded the paper carefully. "Maybe don't push him right now." I frowned. "You think I should let his mother blame me?" "No, I think Grant gets defensive when he feels cornered. Give him time." "You sound like you've discussed this with him." Her hand stopped on the envelope. "I know him through you." The answer was smooth enough to pass. Later, I would learn she photographed that report while I was in the bathroom. The image remained in a cloud backup recovered from her phone during Caleb's paternity case. At the time, I believed she was protecting me. Marissa came to my house after late shifts with wine and takeout containers. She listened while I described Vivian's comments. She told me Grant should defend me. She told me I was more than a wife and more than the children I might or might not have. But her comfort always carried something underneath it. "Maybe motherhood just isn't your road," she once said. Another time, she told me. I asked what that meant. "You're strong," she said. "Grant likes being needed." I thought she was helping me understand him. Looking back, she was explaining why she believed she could replace me. Marissa had spent years telling me she envied my stability. My career, my marriage, the house Grant and I bought. She would laugh and say I had built the life she was still trying to find. I treated those comments like compliments. Envy does not always arrive looking hateful. Sometimes it arrives admiring everything you own while quietly rehearsing how it would look in someone else's hands. There were signs. She began asking when Grant would be home. She knew about an insurance conference before I mentioned it. She once referred to a restaurant he liked even though I had never taken her there. When I asked how she knew, she said she had seen it on social media. I accepted the explanation because suspicion felt uglier than trust. Grant filed for divorce on a Monday in March. I came home after a 20-hour shift during an ice storm. 2 helicopters had been grounded, and we had moved patients by ambulance through roads that looked like sheets of glass. There was a large envelope on the kitchen counter. Grant's closet was half empty. His coffee mug was gone. The framed photograph from our honeymoon had been turned face down. He did not tell me in person. He sent a text. "I'm sorry. We've been unhappy for a long time. This is best for both of us. I called him. He did not answer. I called Marissa. She did not answer either. By Wednesday, I knew why. Grant had moved into her apartment across town. By Friday, half of Ashford knew. By Sunday, Vivian had transformed the affair into a rescue story. According to her, Grant had endured years with a cold, career-obsessed wife who could not give him children and refused to accept responsibility. Marissa was not a betrayer. She was the compassionate woman who had helped him rediscover hope. Grant was not a coward who left divorce papers on a counter. He was a grieving man who had finally chosen family. And I was not the wife whose husband and best friend had deceived her. I was the obstacle they had bravely escaped. The story was so clean that people preferred it to the truth. The truth required them to accept that charming men lie, loyal friends steal, and respected women can be humiliated without deserving it. The lie required only that they pity me. I went to work the next morning. I checked equipment. I reviewed medications. I flew with a 17-year-old boy who had been thrown from a horse and kept him conscious by asking about the dog waiting at home. I completed the flight without missing a step. Inside, I felt as though someone had removed a wall from my life and left the roof standing over nothing. Marissa sent one message 3 weeks later. I never meant to hurt you. I stared at it until the words lost their shape. Then I deleted it. I did not post about the affair or explain myself at church. When mutual friends called, I said only that the marriage was over. Part of me believed silence was dignity. Another part was terrified that if I defended myself too passionately, people would call me bitter and prove Vivian right. That silence became the empty page where the Hale family wrote anything they wanted. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. Grant kept the house because I could not bear to live inside it. I moved into a second-floor apartment, overlooking a used car lot. At night, red and blue sales flags snapped in the wind outside my bedroom window. I kept my work. I kept my name. I kept my grandmother's locket. I told myself those were enough. Then Marissa became pregnant. The announcement appeared online 10 weeks after the divorce was final. A photograph showed Grant kneeling beside her, one hand resting on her stomach. Marissa wore a white sweater and looked directly into the camera. Grant was laughing. The caption read, "Our greatest blessing. Baby Hale arriving this summer." Vivian shared it within minutes. Her message was shorter. Prayers answered. That phrase moved through the town like a verdict. Women who had once told me to be patient congratulated Vivian on finally becoming a grandmother. People said Grant had always been meant to be a father. Someone at the hospital told me gently, as though delivering a diagnosis, that everything happened for a reason. I wanted to ask what reason required my best friend to sleep with my husband and my husband to use a pregnancy as evidence against my body. Instead, I said I had rounds. The baby was a boy. They named him Thomas Grant Hale. Vivian hosted a shower with blue ribbons and framed Bible verses. She filled the church hall with photographs of Grant as a child. She told anyone who would listen that the Hale name would continue. Every celebration sharpened the same message. Grant had not failed to build a family with me. I had failed to build one with him. I might have continued ignoring it if the lie had remained inside church halls and social media comments. But lies rarely stay where they are born. They travel toward whatever you value most. For me, that was my work. The Regional Medical Center was launching a new emergency transport program. I had helped design the protocols, trained the incoming nurses, and rewritten 3 safety procedures after reviewing crash reports from other states. The program director position was the job I had worked toward for years. My supervisor told me privately that I was the strongest candidate. 2 members of the hospital board attended Vivian's church. One of them, Harold Dean, bought commercial coverage through Grant's agency. During the final interview, the board chair asked me whether the previous year had been emotionally difficult. I said divorce was difficult for most people. He shifted in his seat. We've heard concerns. What kind of concerns? About judgment, stability, conflict outside the workplace. I felt the air in the room change. What conflict? He did not answer directly. He mentioned reports that I had been unable to accept Grant's new family. He said someone had alleged I had confronted Marissa and threatened to expose private medical information. I had never confronted Marissa. I had never threatened anyone. Who made that allegation? The board's conversations are confidential. Was it Grant Hale? Harold Dean looked down at his notes. That was answer enough. The position went to a man with 4 fewer years of flight experience than I had. My supervisor called me afterward. Her voice was tight. I'm sorry. Was it the interview? No. Was it my record? No. Then what was it? She paused. You know what it was. I sat alone in the equipment room after that call, surrounded by oxygen tanks and sealed trauma kits. For years, I had believed the truth would eventually sort itself out. Instead, my silence had given the lie time to become a professional fact. That was the moment something in me changed. Not dramatically. There was no burst of rage, no broken glass, no revenge plan. I simply understood that endurance was no longer protecting my dignity. It was protecting the people hurting me. A week later, I met Eleanor Shaw. Eleanor was a defamation attorney in Lexington, with silver hair, narrow glasses, and the unnerving habit of waiting several seconds after people finished speaking. I found her through a physician who had once sued a former business partner. Her office contained no inspirational signs, no family photographs, only shelves, files, and a clock that ticked loudly enough to make silence feel deliberate. I told her everything: the medical testing, Grant's refusal, Vivian's statements, the affair, the church gossip, the call to the hospital board, the lost promotion. Eleanor wrote very little. When I finished, she folded her hands. Do you want revenge? No. The answer came quickly enough to surprise me. What do you want? I want my name back. From whom? I thought about that. The people who believed them. She studied me. Then we need more than a painful story. We need a false statement, publication to a third party, fault, and measurable harm. I have the harm. Yes. The lost position gives us something concrete. But we still need to prove what was said and whether they knew it was false. I told her my testing had been normal. She asked whether I had the records. I did. Then she asked whether Grant had ever been tested. He refused. Are you certain? I started to say yes. Then I remembered Lexington, the unexplained business meeting, the bourbon, the sudden end of every fertility conversation. No, I said slowly. I'm not certain. Eleanor noticed the change in my face. What are you remembering? I told her. She leaned back. A memory is not evidence. I know, but it may tell us where evidence lives. Filing the lawsuit was not easy. I knew what people would say. That I was jealous of the baby. That I wanted Grant back. That I had become unstable after being replaced. That I was punishing a happy family because I could not create one of my own. I called Eleanor before sunrise on a Friday. I'm ready. Good, she said. Then we make them say it, where lying has consequences. The complaint identified specific statements. Vivian telling church members I was medically incapable of having children. Grant telling mutual friends I had refused treatment and blamed him. The allegation that I had threatened Marissa. The call Grant made to Harold Dean 2 days before my final interview, describing me as unstable and warning that I might misuse confidential patient information to retaliate against his family. That call mattered. Grant had not merely allowed his mother to gossip. He had carried the lie into the one place where it could cost me the career I had built. The complaint listed witnesses, dates, salary loss, and damage to my professional reputation. Reading it was strange. Years of humiliation had been turned into numbered paragraphs. Pain becomes different when it is documented. It stops being something people can dismiss as sensitivity and becomes a record someone must answer. Eleanor explained that Grant and Vivian had 2 main choices. They could argue their statements were opinion, exaggeration, or family talk. Or they could claim the statements were true. If they choose truth as a defense, she said, tapping her pen against the file, they will have to support it. They'll choose it. You sound certain. Vivian has repeated the story for 7 years. Grant built his new life on it. They cannot retreat now without admitting what they did. Eleanor gave me a thin smile. Pride makes excellent discovery. Their response arrived 3 weeks later. They claimed the statements were substantially true. According to the filing, our marriage had remained childless because of medical issues associated with me. Grant had supposedly relied on information I shared with him. Vivian had merely repeated what she understood to be true. They also argued that Grant's ability to father a healthy child with Marissa confirmed the reason our marriage had remained childless. Eleanor called me the moment she finished reading. They chose the door. What does that mean? They officially placed your fertility and his claimed paternity at issue. My records already prove I was normal. Yes. But they say your records are incomplete and that Grant relied on private information from the marriage. He's lying. I know. Now we ask the court whether he is. Reproductive records are deeply private. Eleanor warned me that no judge would open Grant's entire medical history because of a suspicion, so she did not ask for his entire history. She requested only records from fertility clinics during the years of our marriage, and only for an in-camera review by the judge. The judge would inspect them privately first. If anything proved directly relevant, a redacted portion could be disclosed under a protective order. Grant's attorney fought the request with astonishing force. They argued harassment. They argued privacy. They argued the motion was designed to embarrass a new father. The harder they fought, the more certain I became that the Lexington trip had not been a business meeting. The judge scheduled a hearing. For nearly a month, I worked, flew, and slept badly. At night, I replayed that Thursday 7 years earlier. Grant leaving before breakfast. Grant returning after dark. The bourbon. His sudden refusal to discuss testing ever again. Memory is dangerous because it rearranges itself after you learn what to look for. I did not want suspicion to harden into certainty, simply because certainty would comfort me. So I waited. The judge granted limited discovery on a gray Wednesday afternoon. Only records directly related to fertility during our marriage would be collected. They would go first to the court, not to me. Everything unrelated would remain sealed. The first person to panic was not Grant. It was Marissa. At 12:43 the following morning, my phone lit up beside my bed. Please stop this. A second message arrived. Think about the baby. Marissa and I had not spoken since the divorce. She had not apologized after moving in with my husband. She had not defended me when Vivian turned me into a warning story. Now, she was awake after midnight, frightened by a motion that was supposedly about Grant's past medical records. I typed a response. What are you afraid of? I did not send it. If Grant had never been tested, the records would show nothing. If he had been tested and was fertile, the records would support him. Neither possibility explained Marissa's fear. Her message suggested a third one. Something in Grant's medical file threatened the story of her child. 8 days later, Eleanor asked me to come to her office. She did not discuss the matter by phone. That alone told me the record existed. When I arrived, she closed the door and placed one sheet of paper on the desk. Most of it had been blacked out under the protective order. Only the clinic name, date, diagnosis, and one conclusion remained visible. Grant had visited a reproductive specialist in Lexington 7 years earlier. The date matched the supposed business meeting. The diagnosis was non-obstructive azoospermia, no measurable sperm. The specialist concluded that biological conception without advanced intervention was extraordinarily unlikely. Grant had signed an acknowledgement, stating that the diagnosis and reproductive implications had been explained to him. He never returned for treatment. I read the page twice. Then a third time. He knew. Yes, Eleanor said. He came home from that clinic and let his mother blame me. The dates support that. He watched me question my own body. Eleanor did not answer. I had imagined proof would feel like victory. It did not. It felt like grief finding a new room inside me. For years, I had watched Grant become a father in public and accepted every congratulation he received as another piece of evidence against myself. Now the truth sat on a single redacted page. I was never broken. Grant had taken something he could not face in himself, placed it over my shoulders, and stood beside his mother while she told the town it fit me perfectly. Then another thought arrived. Marissa's baby. If Grant's diagnosis was accurate, and he had received no treatment, Thomas was almost certainly not biologically his. The arithmetic was simple enough to be brutal. What happens to the baby? I asked. Nothing through our case unless Grant continues relying on paternity as part of his defense. He already did. Yes, which may become important, but we are not investigating a child, we are proving what they said about you was false. I do not want his private information exposed. Neither does the court. That mattered to me. Thomas was innocent. Whatever adults had done around him, he was not evidence to be displayed for entertainment. But Grant had already used him as evidence. And somewhere else, a man named Caleb Trent was trying to prove why. I learned Caleb's full story through filings in the separate paternity case. He had met Marissa at a charity race in Lexington 11 months before my divorce became final. At the time, Grant and I were still legally married, though he had already begun spending nights away from home. Caleb was a physical therapist, recently separated, and new to the area. Marissa told him she was single. For 5 months, they saw each other regularly. Their messages, later produced in court, showed dates, hotel reservations, and weekend plans. More importantly, they showed that Marissa and Caleb were together during the exact conception window listed by her obstetric records. One message changed everything. 3 days after Grant filed for divorce, Marissa wrote Caleb, "I'm late. I don't know what this means yet." Caleb replied that he would go with her to take a test. She did not answer for 2 days. Then, she ended the relationship by text. "I need space. Please don't contact me." Caleb tried anyway. He sent emails. He mailed a certified letter after learning through a mutual friend that Marissa was pregnant. The letter was delivered to her apartment and signed for by Grant. Caleb heard nothing. He stayed away because Marissa told friends he had become obsessive. He feared that pressing harder would be used against him. Then, 3 weeks after Thomas was born, a former coworker showed him Vivian's public post naming the hospital. That was why he walked through the maternity doors that Tuesday. He did not come to threaten anyone. He came because a child had been born within a timeline he could no longer ignore. When Caleb asked Marissa, "Is he mine?" she did not say no. Grant stepped between them and called security. Caleb left peacefully. The next morning, he hired a family law attorney. The paternity case uncovered more than dates. During a court-ordered extraction of Marissa's phone, technicians recovered deleted messages and cloud backups. One was the photograph of my normal fertility report. Another was a conversation between Marissa and Grant from the week she learned she was pregnant. Marissa wrote, "The timing could be Caleb's." "I need to tell you before we do anything," Grant replied. "I know what my doctor said. We are not discussing that with anyone." She asked, "What if the baby isn't yours?" Grant answered, "Then he still gets a father, you get stability, and nobody asks questions about me again." Marissa responded almost an hour later, "What about Lena?" Grant's reply was 7 words. "Once they see the baby, she becomes the answer." I read those words in Eleanor's office after Marissa's deposition was provided under a court order. They were worse than the diagnosis. The diagnosis proved Grant had lied. The messages proved he had designed the lie. He knew the baby might not be his before the pregnancy announcement. He knew his own medical condition made paternity unlikely. He knew Marissa had been with Caleb during the conception window, and he chose to present Thomas publicly as proof that I had been the reason our marriage remained childless. The baby was not simply part of his new life. Grant had turned him into a defense. Marissa had helped. During her deposition, she admitted that she had photographed my test results and shown them to Grant before the divorce. She said she wanted him to know I had been telling the truth. But when Eleanor asked why she never told me about his clinic visit or his messages, Marissa began crying. "I thought he would leave me," she said. "Did you know he was blaming Miss Barrett?" "Yes." "Did you know his mother was repeating that claim publicly?" "Yes." "Did you correct her?" "No." "Why not?" Marissa wiped her face. "Because I wanted the life he promised me." There it was. Not love. Not confusion. A choice. Marissa had envied my stability for years. When Grant offered her the house, the family name, and the appearance of certainty, she accepted the price. The price was my reputation. The first settlement offer arrived soon afterward. Grant and Vivian would pay damages. They would issue a private correction to the hospital board. They would agree never to repeat statements about my fertility or emotional stability. The medical records and paternity evidence would remain sealed. The hearing would be cancelled. I would sign a confidentiality agreement. On paper, it offered almost everything I had originally wanted. Eleanor placed the pages in front of me. "This is substantial. I know. You would be reasonable to accept." "I know." I looked at the signature line. A private correction. A quiet payment. Grant would keep his public story. Vivian would keep her position at church. The people who had watched them turn my body into a moral failure would never have to reconsider what they believed. The truth would enter one boardroom through a confidential letter and disappear into a drawer. Meanwhile, the lie would remain everywhere it had been spoken aloud. "I can't sign it." Eleanor removed her glasses. "Tell me why." "Because they did not damage me privately. You may receive less if we continue." "I understand. The hearing will expose painful facts. Only the facts necessary to correct what they made public." She watched me for a long moment. Then she gathered the settlement papers. "All right." 2 days later, Vivian came to my apartment. She wore the lavender suit she often wore to church and held her purse against her stomach with both hands. I opened the door but did not invite her inside. "You've made your point," she said. "I haven't made it yet. Grant has suffered enough." I waited. "Caleb is trying to destroy their family. Marissa is overwhelmed. The baby is innocent. The baby is innocent." "Then stop." My lawsuit did not create Caleb. It opened things. Grant's choices opened them. Vivian's jaw tightened. "You always did enjoy sounding superior." "No. I spent years making myself smaller so your son would not feel ashamed." Her eyes flickered. For 1 second, I saw a mother beginning to understand that her devotion had been used against another woman. Then she reached for the old weapon. "Some women know how to save a life, Lena, but not how to make one. That was never meant as cruelty." Even with the truth pressing against her, she wanted me to carry the old shame. I touched the locket at my throat. "The shame was never mine, Vivian." She stared at me. "You will regret humiliating this family." I had 7 years to learn what humiliation costs. I closed the door. My hands did not shake. The hearing took place on a cold morning in February. The county courthouse sat across from the diner where Vivian had hosted years of church lunches. By 9 o'clock, the courtroom was nearly full. Small towns attend public collapse with the same energy they bring to weddings. 2 hospital board members sat behind Eleanor and me. My supervisor sat beside them. Several women from Vivian's church circle occupied the second row. Vivian sat stiffly near the aisle, wearing navy blue and pearls. Grant sat beside his attorney. He had lost weight. His suit pulled strangely across the shoulders, as if it belonged to the man he had been before the story turned against him. Marissa sat near the back. Caleb was 2 rows behind her. She never looked at him, but her spine stayed rigid enough to show she knew exactly where he was. I touched the silver locket once, then let it fall against my chest. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Eleanor built the case the way I prepared a patient for flight. Secure one risk. Check the next. Leave nothing loose enough to become dangerous later. She established Vivian's statements through witnesses. A church member admitted hearing Vivian say I was medically incapable of having children. Another testified that Vivian described me as emotionally unstable after the divorce. Harold Dean acknowledged that Grant had called him before my interview and warned the board I might misuse private information against his family. "Did Mr. Hale provide evidence?" Eleanor asked. "No." "Did you ask Miss Barrett for her response?" "No." "Did that call affect your decision?" Harold looked toward the judge. "Yes." Eleanor introduced my medical evaluation, limited to the conclusion that no cause of infertility had been identified in me. Then she introduced the defense filing in which Grant and Vivian claimed their statements were true and relied on Grant's supposed paternity of Thomas. "You alleged," Eleanor said, facing Grant, "that your ability to father a child with Miss Cole confirmed that Miss Barrett was the cause of the childless marriage." Grant's attorney objected to the wording. The judge directed Eleanor to continue. The medical record had already been reviewed privately by the court. Every unrelated detail remained sealed. Only the clinic, date, signed acknowledgement, and relevant conclusion were permitted into evidence. The clinic was in Lexington. The appointment occurred during our marriage. The diagnosis showed no measurable sperm. The signed form confirmed that Grant had been told biological conception without advanced treatment was extraordinarily unlikely. The courtroom changed. Not loudly. The air simply seemed to leave one side of it. One of Vivian's friends turned toward her. Another lowered her eyes. The hospital board chair leaned forward. Vivian did not move. Grant's face became gray. Eleanor allowed the silence to settle. "Did you know of this diagnosis when you told your mother Miss Barrett was responsible for the absence of children?" "I do not remember exactly what the doctor said." Eleanor displayed the acknowledgement. "Is that your signature?" "Yes." "Did you receive treatment?" "No." "Did you tell Miss Barrett?" "No." "Did you correct your mother?" Grant looked at Vivian. "No." "Did you call Harold Dean and describe Miss Barrett as unstable?" "I was protecting my family." "From what?" Grant did not answer. Then Eleanor moved to the final evidence. Because Grant's defense had expressly relied on his paternity of Thomas, the judge permitted 2 limited facts from the related family case. First, court-ordered genetic testing had excluded Grant as Thomas's biological father. Second, a redacted message exchange showed that Grant knew, before the pregnancy announcement, that Caleb could be the father. No medical details about the child were read. No report was displayed. Only the necessary findings entered the record. Grant's attorney stood and argued that private messages were being taken out of context. Eleanor read the lines. Then he still gets a father. You get stability, and nobody asks questions about me again. Once they see the baby, she becomes the answer. A sound moved through the courtroom. This time, it was not disbelief. It was recognition. The people in that room finally understood that the story had not grown accidentally from grief or confusion. Grant had constructed it. Marissa had accepted it. Vivian had carried it into every room where my name could be damaged. Grant stood so abruptly that his chair struck the rail. You are using my son against me. The judge ordered him to sit. Eleanor's voice remained level. No one is using the child against you. The evidence shows you used him against Miss Barrett. Grant turned toward me. For the first time in years, there was no charm in his face. Only fear. Vivian rose. This is what she wanted, she said. She wanted to destroy him because he found happiness. The judge warned her to sit. She pointed at me. She was always cold, always working, always acting better than us. Mrs. Hale, the judge said. Vivian's voice cracked. Some women know how to save a life, but not how to make one. The sentence hung in the courtroom. The same sentence from the church hall. The same sentence that had followed me into the hospital boardroom. The same sentence Vivian had brought to my apartment, as though repetition could keep it true. I stood. Eleanor did not stop me. One person in my marriage knew he could not father a child, I said. The sealed record carried his name, Vivian. Never mine. No one spoke. Grant lowered his eyes. Vivian's hand dropped to her side. Marissa began crying near the back of the room. I did not feel triumphant. I felt finished. After the hearing, Grant's side requested another settlement conference. This time, there was no confidentiality clause protecting their public story. The final agreement required a written retraction sent to the hospital board, the church leadership, and the individuals identified during discovery. It acknowledged that the claims about my fertility, threats, and emotional instability were false. The settlement covered my legal fees, lost income, and professional damages. The hospital opened an independent review. Harold Dean and the second board member connected to Grant were removed from the reconsideration process. 2 months later, the emergency transport director position was offered to me. I accepted. Not because I needed a trophy, because the program carried my work in every protocol, every safety checklist, and every nurse I had trained. My first morning as director, I arrived before sunrise. The hangar lights reflected off the helicopter windows. A young nurse stood beside the supply cart, nervous about her first flight. She asked whether fear ever disappeared. No, I said. You just learn which part of it deserves your attention. Grant left Ashford before summer. His business lost clients after the public correction reached people he had approached about me. He moved to Tennessee and joined another agency. Vivian stopped leading the women's circle at church. No one formally removed her. They simply stopped asking. Marissa admitted in family court that Caleb could be Thomas's father, and that she had hidden the truth because she wanted the security Grant promised. Caleb was confirmed as Thomas's biological father. He did not try to take the child away. He requested legal recognition and a gradual parenting plan. Thomas was never punishment. He was never proof. He was a child born into a lie adults had created, before he took his first breath. I hope the people raising him eventually understand that. The sweetest part of my ending did not happen in court. It happened slowly. A year after the hearing, I began spending time with Miles Carter, one of the flight mechanics assigned to our program. Miles had known the public version of my story, but he never asked me for the dramatic details. He asked whether I was sleeping. He asked whether directing the program made me happy. He accepted not yet, without turning it into an insult. 2 years later, we married beside the river from my grandmother's photograph. Miles's 12-year-old niece, June, carried the rings. She had been living with him while her mother entered long-term treatment. When it became clear June needed a permanent home, Miles and I became her guardians. We gave her a room overlooking the maple tree and let trust grow at its own speed. One evening, months later, she sat at the kitchen table, struggling with a science project. She looked up and said, "Mom, do we have more poster board?" The word entered the room so naturally that neither of us moved for a second. Then I showed her where we kept it. That night, I opened my grandmother's locket. Her photograph remained on one side. On the other, I placed a small picture from our wedding. Miles smiling, June rolling her eyes at the camera, and me standing between them beneath the sycamore trees. For years, Vivian had defined family as something my body had failed to produce. She was wrong. Family was not proof of fertility. Motherhood was not a prize awarded to the woman who protected a man's pride. A family could begin with a frightened child asking for poster board. It could grow through ordinary breakfasts, school pickups, boundaries, apologies, and the promise to remain. I did not win because I became louder than the Hale family. I won because I stopped treating silence as the price of dignity. The truth had existed for years inside a sealed file. What changed my life was finally giving it a place to speak. If you have ever carried shame that belonged to someone else, remember Lena's story. Like this video, subscribe to Calm Deception Stories, and share it with a woman who needs to hear that a quiet truth can still change her life.